Hey traders, Raghee here, and in this free recap video, I want to talk about two stocks that are important to futures index traders, and that's because they're so heavily weighted within their futures, their respective futures index, and that's going to be Apple, and that's going to be Boeing. Now, why are these two so interesting? When you look across all the heavily weighted names in the Dow, and I'm going to show you how I do that, because what I like to do is put together what I call a multi-chart like this, the Dow in the upper left-hand corner, and then all the heavily weighted names within that index following that. Now, Boeing is the #1 weighted name. Now, take a look. UNH trying to break down, but a lot of you already know I'm quite bullish on healthcare going into next year. So UNH, I know, is going to be more part of this healthcare optimism, this healthcare long position that I'm building. Then we've got financials, which I think will continue to head lower. Goldman's getting a nice little bounce, but remember, in the big picture of things, please don't take Goldman's bounce out of context. Goldman has not been participating with the overall strength in any kind of XLF bounce, truly, and certainly not in the overall uptrend of the Dow. So Boeing is actually hanging in there really well, as is Apple. Apple's hanging in there really, really well as well. What do I mean by hanging in there? They're both, I mean, Apple's quite bearish now after the earnings, and we had talked about being bearish off overbought resistance levels. But when I say they're holding up, notice that unlike, say, Amazon, Apple's not in a downtrend. You know, if you look at Boeing, unlike other names within the Dow, so what could we pluck out to compare Boeing to? Take a look. Could I take a look at Home Depot? 3M, you know, look at Boeing as opposed to 3M, downtrend, as opposed to Home Depot, downtrend. So that's what I mean by Apple and Boeing holding up pretty darn well. But if these two #1 weighted names within their respective index futures contracts are all that is left to possible a really big move to the downside, keep an eye on these two names. I think Apple's already started, really, to me, confirming the weakness to come in the S&P and certainly in the NASDAQ. Now, we might get a bounce here or there based upon elections. We might get a bounce here or there based upon any kind of optimism about the U.S.-China kind of trade war ceasefire, if you will. But for the most part, I think the die is cast. All right, now that could be any one of the quantitative reasons that I have talked about in the past, if you've been keeping up with this free video, but I think one of the things that really has to be an important signal this week, just really 3 sessions ago, is the breakdown through the 65.5 level on crude oil. And remember, this is a crude oil market that's selling off, good well knowing into this weekend the Iran sanctions are coming. We might get one more bounce, but again, as traders ended the week, knowing that November 2 is that big cutoff, November 4 is that big cutoff, the market decided to close into lows, close lower as the week into that big announcement, into that big event, I should say, started. So that's pretty telling. We didn't see a rally into that uncertainty. We saw more sell-off and a break of the 200 EMA. And this is the final domino for me to really start to commit a whole lot more confidence to this longer-term weakness. Again, elections and the U.S.-China story could make this a bumpier ride to the downside. But for a lot of folks who are still curious, Raghee, you bearish? Yes, absolutely. This is the new downtrend that we're looking at. And it may still be very volatile as the distribution market trend that precedes most downtrends are. But again, look at the data, gang. Look at what bonds are signaling. We'll continue to talk about this going forward, but I think this is a good time to continue to look at XLP, XLU, and other names like that in order to position yourself in names I think that could be more resilient. That's XLU, XLP, XLV. We'll be looking more at the long bond via either the futures or the TLT ETF. Still very bullish in the dollar, and these are all the things that I would typically do looking at the kind of weakness we're seeing in equities. I'll see you in the next update.